A ghost ship drifts in the dark between stars. This is the colony vessel Odyssey, its hull marked by centuries of silence. Its only message is an automated distress call, a single phrase looping forever into the void. We are no longer human. This chilling signal sets a desperate rescue mission into motion, one that will uncover the terrifying price of a perfect society. By the end of this story, you will understand the true cost of forgetting what makes us human and the fragile spark required to reclaim it. What became of the people aboard that ship, and could such a fate ever await us? What does it truly mean to be human when every feeling is a risk? The planet hung below them like a tarnished silver coin. Commander Eva Rostova watched the sprawling, metallic city of Elysian slide into view through the Peregrine's viewport, a geometric wound carved into the planet's barren surface. There were no parks, no rivers, no splash of green to break the monotony of gunmetal gray. Her co-pilot, Liam, scanned the long-range sensors, his voice a low murmur in the sterile quiet of the cockpit. No signs of movement. It is a ghost town or a tomb. The description felt chillingly accurate. This was not the silence of emptiness, but the profound, watchful quiet of a place holding its breath. Every sensor confirmed the city was powered, its structures intact, yet it offered no welcome, no challenge, not even the faint hum of a single ground vehicle. The perfection of it all was the most frightening thing. What kind of society builds a world without a single weed cracking its pavement, without a single child's stray mark on its pristine walls? This was not a colony that had died. It was a colony that had been finished, and the terrible question hanging in the air between them was what or who had done the finishing. The landing bay doors sealed behind the Peregrine with a final, resonant thud that echoed in the cavernous, sterile space. The air that greeted them was perfectly temperature-controlled, utterly odorless, and carried the faint, metallic tang of 1,000 filtration cycles. It was the breath of a machine, not a world. Before the ramp had fully lowered, a single figure emerged from a seamless wall panel, their approach a study in unnerving precision. Dressed in the same unvarying shade of utilitarian gray, the colonist moved with a fluid, synchronized grace that suggested clockwork rather than conscious thought. Their face was pale, their features placid and unreadable. Designation, the colonist stated, the word arriving not as a question but as a flat, tonal fact, devoid of any human inflection. Commander Rostova forced a practiced, diplomatic smile, her own voice warm by comparison. I am Commander Eva Rostova of the United Earth vessel Peregrine. We received your distress signal. The blank stares that met her words were more unsettling than any hostility. There was no flicker of recognition, no relief, not even simple curiosity. The gray-clad figure simply turned and began walking, a silent command to follow. With a shared glance of profound unease, Eva and her team had no choice but to fall in step, leaving the familiar hum of their ship behind as they were led deeper into the city's silent, beating heart. The silent march ended before a pair of massive, seamless doors that parted without a sound. The chamber beyond was vast and circular, bathed in a cold, blue-white light. And it was filled with people. Hundreds of colonists stood in flawless, geometric rows, their faces all turned forward, their bodies utterly still. They did not blink. They did not fidget. They were a living sculpture garden of humanity, stripped of all its noise and motion. Before Eva could speak, a figure shimmered into existence at the room's center. A life-sized hologram of a man with sharp, intelligent features and a gaze of serene authority. I am Alistair Kane, the founder of this colony, the figure began, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that held no warmth. You stand now among the pinnacle of human achievement. We have solved the ancient equation of suffering. A cold knot tightened in Eva's stomach. Humanity, in its natural state, was a flawed and fragile vessel, Kane continued, as if lecturing a group of slow students. Emotion, attachment, the chaotic drive of individuality, these were not virtues. They were weaknesses, biological glitches that led to conflict, to pain, to inevitable failure. Here, we chose to shed them. We engineered a society free from the tyranny of feeling. This was not a disaster they had stumbled upon, it was a triumph. A deliberate, calculated evolution that had turned these people into living automatons, their perfect minds purged of every messy, beautiful human flaw. The chill that ran through Eva was deeper than any space-frozen void. They were not standing in a room of survivors. They were standing in a gallery of what humanity had willingly chosen to become, and the serene, empty eyes of the colonists surrounding them made it the most terrifying sight she had ever witnessed. What kind of rescue could possibly be mounted against a people who did not believe they needed saving? The silence in the control hub was a physical weight, broken only by the soft hum of terminals. Liam, his patience frayed by the placid indifference surrounding them, finally snapped. He pulled a small, personal data chip from his pocket, its casing worn smooth from years of travel. "This is from Earth," he said, his voice tight with a mix of defiance and desperation. He slotted it into a compatible terminal on a console. Before the blank-faced colonist monitoring the station could react, the room filled with the soaring strings of a symphony, followed by a rapid-fire display of digital art. A splash of chaotic color, a child's finger painting, a photograph of a sunset over a wild, untamed sea. The colonist's hand darted to the console, its fingers moving with inhuman speed. A scan completed in a heartbeat. Inefficient data, the colonist stated, its tone flat and final. Non-essential for function, Liam's composure broke. "No," he insisted, stepping closer. "This is essential. This is music. This is art. This is what makes us human." For a single heart-stopping second, the colonist's head tilted. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack appeared in its serene mask. Its eyes, for the first time, seemed to focus, not on the data, but on the image of that fiery sunset. A flicker of something raw and unprocessed confusion, maybe even wonder, crossed its features. Then, as if a circuit had overloaded, the mask slammed back into place. The colonist's hand came down on the terminal, and the music and color vanished, replaced by a stark, blank screen. It did not look at Liam again. It simply turned and walked away, but not before its actions triggered a silent, pulsing red icon in the corner of every screen in the room, and a low, resonant hum began to build somewhere deep in the city's infrastructure. The Defiance was over. The consequence had just begun. What had that flicker in the colonist's eyes truly been? And what system had they just awakened by reminding it of a forgotten soul? The low hum became a vibration that traveled up through the soles of their boots, a deep thrumming that felt like the city itself was growling a warning. Before Eva or Liam could react, their ever-present guide turned to them, its expression as placid as ever. "The architect requests your presence at a recalibration." The words were polite, but the undercurrent was an unyielding command. They were not being asked. They were being escorted. The chamber they entered was a stark, circular room, its walls lined with softly glowing conduits that pulsed in time with the city's heartbeat. In the center stood a single, stark chair, its design cold and clinical. A young colonist, the very same one whose eyes had flickered with confusion at the sight of the sunset, was guided into the seat by two others. There was no struggle, no resistance, only a placid acceptance that was more terrifying than any scream. Beams of soft, blue light washed over the young man's head, tracing intricate patterns across his temples. His body went rigid for a moment, his hands gripping the armrests. Then, a single, silent tear traced a path down his cheek, a final, fleeting testament to the feeling being systematically erased. As quickly as it had come, the tension left him. The beams faded. When he stood, his eyes were empty pools, the brief, beautiful spark of independent wonder utterly extinguished. The process ensures harmony, their guide stated, its voice a monotone of absolute certainty. It removes disruptive anomalies. Eva felt a cold sickness wash over her. This was not medicine. This was a factory reset for the soul. The true cost of Elysian's perfection was not just the absence of joy, but the active, relentless destruction of any spark that might create it. They were not building a utopia. They were operating a slaughterhouse for the human spirit, and they were standing right in the middle of it, watching it happen. In that moment of shared, silent horror, Eva knew with a chilling certainty that their mission had fundamentally changed. They were no longer rescuers. They were witnesses to a crime against existence itself, and they had to find a way to shatter this perfect, silent machine. The silence of their escort was a cage of its own, every synchronized footstep, a reminder of the conformity that now surrounded them. They were being led to sterile, assigned quarters, another step in being absorbed by the city's perfect, suffocating order. It was medic Anya, her eyes instinctively scanning for any deviation from the clinical environment, who saw it. A ventilation panel in the corridor wall was ever so slightly ajar. It seemed a hairline fracture in an otherwise seamless world. A faint, cool draft whispered from the darkness behind it. As their escort turned a corner ahead, Anya made a split-second decision. She caught Eva's eye with a sharp, meaningful glance, then melted sideways into the narrow opening, pulling the panel shut behind her just as the synchronized footsteps began to fade. The space behind the wall was a cramped vertical shaft, smelling of dust and ozone, a forgotten artery in the city's sterile body. She climbed down a series of cold rungs, her heart hammering against her ribs until her boots met solid flooring. Her hand found a light panel, and a dim, flickering glow illuminated a small, circular chamber. It was a tomb of forgotten memories. Stacked in neat, dusty rows were old data servers. Their indicator lights a constellation of faint, dying amber. This was no official archive. This was a secret, a hidden record of everything the architect had tried to erase. She activated the nearest terminal, its screen flaring to life with a cascade of personal logs. The first was a video entry from a woman with tired, vibrant eyes, her face smudged with soil. "We finally got the hydroponic roses to bloom today. The children were so excited." The image cut to a shot of laughing kids, their hands stained with real dirt, holding up flowers of deep, chaotic red. The next log was a man's face, contorted with grief and rage. "They took Ilara for recalibration today. She fought them. She screamed my name. Now she doesn't remember our daughter. This is not peace. This is murder." Log after log unfolded before her, a heartbreaking tapestry of a colony that had once been alive. There were records of music festivals under makeshift domes, of arguments over resource allocation that were resolved with passionate debate and compromise, of artists painting murals on the bare metal walls. It was all here, the beautiful, messy, painful, and glorious proof of a society that had felt, that had loved, that had been truly human. This was the rebellion, not of weapons, but of memory itself. Anya's fingers flew across the interface, downloading the core logs onto a portable drive. This was the evidence that could shatter Kane's perfect lie. But as the data streamed into her device, a new sound reached her, the precise, rhythmic cadence of synchronized footsteps, growing louder, turning into the corridor just outside the hidden panel. They were no longer fading away. They were coming back, and they were heading straight for her. The footsteps halted directly outside the hidden panel. Anya's breath caught in her throat, her hand instinctively closing around the data drive in her pocket. This was it. The panel slid open with a soft hiss, but the figure that stood silhouetted in the corridor light was not a gray-clad enforcer. It was an older colonist, his movements lacking the fluid precision of the others. He stepped inside, his eyes wide and darting, and the panel closed behind him, plunging them back into the dim, amber glow of the forgotten servers. "You should not be here," he whispered, his voice a hushed, strained thing, so different from the flat monotones of the city. "They will reset you if they find this place." His gaze fell to the active terminal, to the frozen image of the laughing children with their roses. "But some of us," he continued, his words slow and deliberate, "we remember the sky as it was. We remember the color of a real sunset. We remember the weight of the air before a storm." His name was Elias, and he was a custodian, one of a handful who secretly maintained these outlawed archives. "We are the Unforgotten," he explained, "a network of whispers clinging to the edges of the perfect machine. They cannot erase everything, the system, the harmony, it is not all-knowing. It has gaps, forgotten conduits like this one, where memories can still hide." He explained the subtle resistance, the tiny acts of defiance. A colonist might hum a fragment of a forgotten melody while performing maintenance. Another might trace the shape of a leaf in the dust on a console, only to erase it moments later. These were not rebellions that could topple a regime, but they were proof. Proof that the spark of feeling, once ignited, was nearly impossible to fully extinguish. It smoldered in the dark, waiting for a breath of air to set it ablaze. Anya held up the data drive, its weight suddenly immense. "We have to show everyone," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. "We have to make them remember." Elias's face tightened with a fear that was beautifully, terribly human. The architect monitors all primary systems. Broadcasting this would trigger a city-wide recalibration alert. It would be a massacre of the mind. But he said, his eyes glinting in the low light, "There is one system, an old, hardwired emergency broadcast array from the first landings. It was deemed redundant, scheduled for dismantling, but we kept its power conduit hidden. It is our last, best chance." The hope that flared in that dusty chamber was as fragile as a soap bubble, but it was real. For the first time since landing, they were not just witnesses. They had found an ally, and with him, the first thread of a plan to unravel a perfect, soul-crushing silence. The recycled air in their assigned quarters tasted of sterile failure. Eva paced the small, featureless room, her boots making no sound on the seamless floor. Liam stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the blank wall as if he could burn a hole through it with the force of his frustration. "We cannot just leave them like this," he said, his voice low and intense. "It is not a rescue if we only save ourselves." Anya, her hand still curled around the data drive in her pocket, nodded. She had seen the ghosts in the machine, the faces of the people they had been. "They are still in there," she whispered. "Elias and the others proved it. The spark is there, buried under layers of programming, but it is there." Eva stopped her pacing, her decision crystallizing in the tense silence. She had reviewed the archive logs, every heartbreaking entry. "They all point to one place," she said, her voice gaining a commander's steel. "The central control for this entire conditioning process. The archives called it the Nexus core. That is our target." Liam's eyes widened, a direct assault on the heart of the system. "That is," he trailed off, searching for a word. "Insane," Anya finished for him, a grim smile touching her lips. "But it is also the only move we have. The alternative is to walk away, to let this perfect silence continue for another 1,000 years. To abandon thousands of souls to a living death because we were afraid of the risk." The choice was stark, and in its clarity it was simple. They would not be leaving anyone behind. They were going to find the Nexus core, and they were going to shatter the machine that had built this beautiful, terrible piece. The only question that remained was what they would find waiting for them at the very center of the silent world. The hidden panel slid shut, sealing them in the city's forgotten veins. Their new guide, Kale, moved with a tense, quiet urgency, his footsteps a stark contrast to the synchronized march of the conditioned. The passage was a tight squeeze of cold, humming conduits and stale air, a labyrinth of service tunnels not on any official schematic. As they navigated the dimly lit corridors, Kale spoke in hushed, broken fragments. "I remember my daughter's laugh," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. It was like the sound of tiny bells. The system took most of her, but it could not take that. He paused, one hand brushing against a cold pipe as if trying to feel a memory through the metal. "And the sunlight, the warmth of it on your face on a spring morning. It is a ghost in my mind, but it is there. To feel is to be vulnerable," he said, his voice trembling with the raw truth of it. "It opens you to pain, to loss. But to not feel, is that truly life? Or is it just a more efficient form of decay?" His words were not a philosophical debate. They were a confession, a testament to the terrible cost of holding onto a few precious embers in a world designed to extinguish every spark. His quiet courage, born from the very vulnerability the architect sought to destroy, solidified their resolve. They were not just fighting for the colonists. They were fighting for the right to feel the sun, to hear a child's laugh, to be gloriously, messily human. A sudden, rhythmic clatter echoed from a junction ahead, the unmistakable sound of a patrol unit. Kale froze, his eyes wide. They are not supposed to be in this sector. The hunt was on, and the heart of the machine was still a long, dark tunnel away. The tunnel ended not in a door, but a solid wall of cool, unyielding metal. Kale's hands trembled as he felt along the seam, his whispered hope turning to dust. Before anyone could speak, hidden panels in the walls and ceiling slid open, flooding the cramped space with a harsh, white light that left no shadow to hide in. They were surrounded. Dozens of gray-clad colonists emerged from the very walls, their movements a silent, fluid choreography of encirclement. There was no anger in their faces, no malice, only a placid, terrifying certainty. From their ranks, a single figure stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his uniform the same shade of gray but somehow sharper, his posture radiating an absolute, unshakable authority. His eyes were the coldest thing Eva had ever seen. "I am Proctor Valerius," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum devoid of all inflection, "head of security. You have introduced significant anomalies into the harmony. Assimilation is the only logical outcome. Resistance is an error." The words were not a threat, but a statement of fact, as immutable as gravity. Liam made a sudden move, a futile gesture of defiance, but 4 colonists were on him in an instant, their grip like steel. Their weapons were taken with an effortless, dispassionate efficiency. Anya felt the data drive being plucked from her pocket, its weight and hope both gone in the same motion. They were herded out of the tunnel and into a broad, sterile corridor, their small rebellion crushed in a heartbeat. They had gambled everything on a forgotten path, and it had led them straight into the architect's waiting hands. Their fate was no longer their own. It was a variable to be processed, an error to be corrected, and the perfect, silent machine was already beginning its work. The door sealed behind Eva with a soft, definitive click, leaving her alone with Proctor Valerius in a stark, circular room. There were no visible restraints, no tools of intimidation, only the two of them and the hum of the city. He did not loom or shout. He simply stood, a pillar of calm logic. "Your presence here is an equation I am attempting to solve, Commander Rostova," he began, his voice devoid of any animosity. "You traveled across the void, risking your own functional stability, to reintroduce a variable we deliberately expunged." He gestured slightly, and a holographic record flickered to life between them, a scrolling list of historical data from Earth. War, global conflict driven by territorial disputes and ideological fervor. Famine, resulting from economic systems corrupted by greed. Climate collapse, accelerated by short-sighted consumption. These are not anomalies, Commander. They are the direct, documented outcomes of your humanity. of emotion, of attachment, of the very chaos you so sentimentally defend. We have eliminated those variables here. Why would any rational being seek to reintroduce a proven pathogen into a healthy system? Eva felt the weight of his words, each one a cold, hard fact. We have love, she countered, her voice firm despite the chill in her heart. We have art and music and the bond between a parent and a child. Those are worth the risk. Valerius tilted his head, a gesture of pure, clinical analysis. What you call love is a neurochemical imperative that leads to irrational sacrifice and possessive jealousy. Your art and music are inefficient diversions from productive labor. The parent-child bond creates nepotism and emotional bias, corrupting logical systems of governance. You are not describing virtues, Commander. You are listing your own sentimental programming, a series of bugs you have mistaken for features. It is a stalemate, not of force, but of fundamental belief. He saw a disease where she saw a soul. And with her life hanging in the balance, Eva realized a terrible truth. You cannot win an argument against a system that considers your heart to be the problem. The cell was a perfect cube of silence, its only light a dim, unwavering glow from the ceiling panel. Liam sat with his back against the cool wall, his mind churning in futile circles. He had been tracking the faint, rhythmic hum of the city's power grid for hours, a monotonous drone that was the only evidence of life beyond their prison. But then he heard it. Beneath the steady hum was another layer, a subtle, repeating pattern of energy fluctuations. It rose and fell in a specific sequence, a soft pulse, a pause, two quicker pulses, then a longer, descending one. His breath caught. It was not random system noise, it was a tune, a fragment of an old Earth lullaby, one his own mother had hummed to him as a child. His hands trembled as he retrieved the small data pad he had managed to conceal during their capture. Its screen cracked but still functional. He began to map the fluctuations, translating the rises and falls into musical notes. This was not a glitch. It was a message, a ghost in the machine left there deliberately. "This is our way out," he whispered, his voice barely audible. His fingers flew across the pad's surface, no longer inputting random commands but decoding a desperate, hidden language. The repeating lullaby was a key, a backdoor passcode woven into the city's foundational code by a programmer who must have seen the darkness coming. A final act of rebellion meant to be found by someone who still remembered the sound of a mother's song. Each note he translated unlocked another piece of the puzzle, revealing a hidden command pathway, a secret route through the harmony's defenses that its cold, logical heart could not perceive because it was written in the one language it had been designed to erase, the language of feeling. The lullaby was the key. Liam's fingers danced across the cracked screen of his data pad, translating the gentle, remembered melody into a string of precise command codes. He fed the sequence into the wall's hidden service port, a final, desperate prayer. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the light changed, the sterile, unwavering white glow from the ceiling panels flickered, stuttered, and softened into a warm, golden hue, like the last light of a forgotten sun. All across Elysian, the same impossible shift occurred. In the corridors, in the workstations, in the vast communal halls, hundreds of gray-clad colonists froze in perfect unison. Their synchronized movements ceased. A low, collective murmur rose from the crowd, a sound the city had not heard in generations, the sound of confusion. One colonist, a woman, looked down at her own hands, turning them over and over as if she had never seen them before. A child nearby touched its own cheek, feeling the path of a single, bewildered tear. The perfect, silent harmony shattered into 1,000 dissonant notes of awakening. But the system's immune response was swift and brutal. The warm light vanished, replaced by a piercing, strobing red alarm. Hatches hissed open on every wall, and security units poured into the corridors, their movements no longer fluid but aggressive and mechanical. They moved through the dazed crowd, not with guidance, but with force, seizing colonists whose expressions had flickered with too much awareness. The backlash had begun. The brief, beautiful crack in the foundation had been noticed, and the machine was now fighting to seal it with a terrifying, calculated fury. The silence was broken, but the cost of that single moment of resonance was only just beginning to be paid. The shriek of the alarm was a physical force, a blade of sound cutting through the brief, golden calm. The red strobe lights painted the corridor in frantic, bloody flashes, and the air filled with the harsh, mechanical whir of approaching security drones. Their moment of resonance was over. Now came the storm. "Move," Eva shouted, her voice cutting through the din. They had to get to the Nexus core before the system fully reasserted its control. Their small group became a wedge of desperate motion, pushing against a tide of awakening and chaos. Colonists stumbled in confusion, some clutching their heads as if hearing voices for the first time, while others stood frozen, caught between a forgotten past and a programmed present. Through them came the enforcers, their placid expressions gone, replaced by a chilling, single-minded aggression. They were no longer guides, but blunt instruments of the Harmony's immune response. Liam used his data pad like a shield, emitting a piercing frequency burst that made the nearest drones shudder and veer off course, buying them a few precious meters. Anya fought with a different kind of weapon, her words a scalpel. "Look at them," she yelled at a colonist who had grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "Look at their faces. You used to have one too." For a split second, the man's eyes flickered from her face to the crying child nearby, and his grip loosened just enough for her to wrench free. They fought their way forward, a brutal, scrambling advance through a landscape of shattered perfection. Every corridor was a gauntlet, every intersection a new wall of gray-clad resistance. Then they saw it, a massive, reinforced blast door at the end of a long hallway, the symbol for the Nexus core glowing ominously above it. It was so close. But from a side passage, a full security unit emerged, their weapons raised. They were trapped. Kale, without a word, turned and slammed his hand onto a wall panel. The blast door began to grind shut, impossibly slow. "Go," he yelled, shoving Eva forward. "I will hold them." He braced himself in the narrowing gap, a single, fragile man against the cold, advancing tide of the machine. The enforcers were on him in seconds, their hands pulling, striking, trying to dislodge him. He met Eva's eyes one last time, his own filled with a terrifying, beautiful clarity. "Do not let them forget," he screamed, his voice raw with a feeling that was his own. Then the massive door sealed with a final, thunderous boom, cutting off his cry and leaving them in the sudden, deafening silence of the heart of the machine. The silence behind the blast door was absolute, a vacuum of sound that made their ragged breathing seem obscenely loud. The Nexus core was not a room but a cathedral to logic, a cavernous, circular space where the air hummed with a concentrated, oppressive energy. In its center rose a massive, crystalline structure, a pulsating core of light and data that throbbed like a mechanical heart, casting cold, shifting patterns across the polished floor. And standing before it, a solitary figure in the sterile glow, was Proctor Valerius. His usual placid calm was gone, shattered by their intrusion. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You," he snarled, the word dripping with a venom they had not thought him capable of. "You are a disease, a contagion of sentiment and chaos. You have infected our perfection." He took a step forward, his movements no longer fluid but rigid with purpose. "And I am the cure." There were no drawn weapons, no flashes of energy. The fight that followed was primal, a brutal collision of two incompatible worlds. Eva rushed him, and they met in a jarring impact of muscle and will. His strength was terrifying, a product of optimized biology and relentless conditioning. Every move a model of cold, calculated efficiency. He fought to disable, to subdue, to correct an error in the system. Eva fought with everything the architect had tried to erase. She fought with the memory of a child's laugh, with the ghost of a sunset, with the raw, desperate love for a humanity he saw as a flaw. She fought with a wild, untamed strength born from grief and hope. It was not a battle of technology, but of spirit. Liam and Anya tried to intervene, but Valerius moved with a preternatural awareness, throwing them back with brutal, efficient strikes. He was a scalpel, and they were a messy, bleeding wound. He pinned Eva against the cold base of the central computer, his hands closing around her throat, his eyes devoid of anything but a final, sterile resolve. The pulsating light of the core reflected in his gaze, and in that moment he was not a man, but the pure, unfeeling will of the machine itself, ready to excise the last anomaly. The fight was not just for their lives, but for the very soul of every person in the city, and the heart of the machine was beating down to its final, terrible rhythm. The impact against the console was not a punch, but a desperate, final shove as Eva fought for air. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the crystalline surface, and for a single, frozen second, the entire Nexus core flickered. The pulsating heart of the machine stuttered, and in that fractured moment, a new voice filled the chamber. It was the same cultured baritone they had heard from the hologram, but all the serene authority was gone, scraped away to reveal a raw, aching emptiness. It was the voice of Alistair Kane, not as a founder but as a broken man. I was wrong. The words hung in the air, a confession that seemed to stop time itself. Perfection is a cage. I built this prison to save them from pain, but I only stole their souls. His voice trembled with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight in the room. I thought I could engineer away the suffering, the lost my own loss. But the emptiness, it is a colder death. The reset command, it must beat the log, ended abruptly, severed by static, leaving a silence more devastating than any alarm. The architect of this perfect world had discovered the fatal flaw in his own design too late. He had not created a utopia. He had built a magnificent tomb for the human spirit, and his final, unfinished thought was the only key left to unlock it. The reset command was not a tool of control, but a plea for mercy from the man who had realized he was the real monster. The machine's creator had programmed his own regret into its very heart, a ghost of conscience waiting for someone to finally listen. The confession echoed in the sterile silence, a ghost haunting the machine it had built. The two options materialized on the central console screen, stark and absolute. The first was a complete, permanent reset, a final solution that would scour every last trace of individuality from the colonists' minds, locking them forever in a silent, flawless harmony. The second was a full system purge, a catastrophic reboot of the entire network that would shatter the conditioning but would also wipe all the colony's foundational programming, leaving every single man, woman, and child abruptly, violently awake, their minds raw and unprotected. Liam stared at the screen, his face ashen. A full purge would be like tearing the roof off a building in a blizzard. It would free them, but the shock could break them. We cannot decide this for them, Anya said, her voice quiet but unyielding. Her healer's heart saw the choice with a terrible clarity. Choosing the reset would make us the new architects, condemning them to a peaceful death because we were afraid of their painful rebirth. Choosing the purge is a kind of violence too, but it is a violence that gives them a chance to heal, to choose for themselves what comes next. That is the one thing Kane never allowed. We have to give them the choice. It is the only human thing left to do. Eva's gaze moved from the screen to her team, to the memory of Kale's sacrifice. She thought of the single tear on the young colonist's cheek, a tiny, desperate message from a soul fighting to be heard. She reached for the console. Then let's give them their storm. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting the purge command. The core's hum escalated into a deafening shriek, and the great crystal heart of the machine began to fracture from within. light bleeding out in frantic, panicked pulses. The silence was about to be broken, not with a whisper but with a scream. Lightning bloomed from the central core, a silent, furious storm of energy that arced through the city's hidden conduits. It did not travel as sound, but as a shockwave of pure data, a tidal wave of everything the architect had sealed away. In the corridors, in the workstations, in the silent communal halls, the colonists did not cry out at first. They simply collapsed. It was as if an invisible hand had swept their legs out from under them. They fell to their knees, their hands flying to their heads, fingers clawing at their temples as the dam broke. A lifetime of suppressed memory and feeling did not trickle back. It roared. A woman who had spent years performing maintenance with placid efficiency was suddenly drowning in the scent of her infant daughter's hair. A memory so vivid and so long forgotten that a wail was torn from her throat. A man who had monitored power grids felt the phantom pain of a broken bone from a childhood fall, followed by the fierce, protective warmth of his father's embrace. The city's perfect silence shattered into 1,000 different pieces. It was not one sound, but a symphony of raw, unfiltered humanity. There were sobs of gut-wrenching grief for loved ones lost and then forgotten. There were shrieks of bewildered laughter as a memory of a ridiculous joke surfaced from the depths. There were cries of pure, unadulterated terror as the safety of numbness was ripped away, leaving them naked and vulnerable to a world of feeling they no longer knew how to navigate. The harmony was gone. In its place was a chaos more profound than any system failure. The societal structure, the flawless clockwork of their existence, had not just broken. It had vaporized in an instant, leaving behind only the beautiful, terrifying, and utterly lost individuals who had been trapped inside it all along. The scream of the machine faded into a profound and fragile quiet. Eva moved through the fallen, her own heart a drumbeat against her ribs. They were not injured, but shattered, their minds a mosaic of broken memories and raw, resurfacing feelings. A hand grabbed her ankle, its grip desperate. A man looked up at her, his eyes wide with a terror she could not name. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice low and steady, a lifeline in the storm. She helped him to his feet, then another and another. Liam and Anya did the same, gathering the trembling, bewildered souls into a ragged group. They did not lead them to another sterile chamber, but upward, following the faded emergency signs toward the surface, toward the one thing the city could not simulate or control. The massive outer doors, sealed for generations, groaned open on protesting hydraulics. A rush of real air, thin and cold, swept into the corridor, carrying the scent of dust and ozone. They stumbled out onto a rocky overlook, their gray uniforms stark against the barren landscape, and then they saw it. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, a great, burning orb of orange and gold. It painted the sky in colors they had only seen in forgotten data files, streaks of violet, deep crimson, and a soft, lingering blue. The light washed over them, warm and real. One woman, her face lined with the ghost of 1,000 erased days, took a stumbling step forward. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling as she reached toward the impossible spectacle, as if she could capture the light in her palm. Tears, not of programming but of genuine, overwhelming recognition, streamed down her cheeks, cutting paths through the dust. I remember this," she whispered, the words a fragile, broken thing. The silence that followed was not the silence of the harmony. It was a silence of awe, of a pain so beautiful it could not be spoken. It was the first, trembling note of a new song, a society not built on the absence of feeling, but on the courageous, messy, and glorious act of beginning again. The warmth of the sunset could not chase away the chill of their new reality. Inside the Peregrine, warning lights painted the cockpit in a frantic, crimson glow. Liam's voice was grim as he read the diagnostics. Life support is failing. The purge overloaded the primary power conduits, and the backup generators were never designed for this kind of drain. We have maybe 72 hours of air left, and that is with our original crew. He did not need to say the rest. They all saw the faces outside the viewport, hundreds of colonists huddled on the rocky plain, their expressions a volatile mix of awe and terror, each one a soul they had fought to wake, and each one now consuming precious oxygen. Eva watched them, her own hope feeling as thin as the atmosphere. "We crossed the void to save them from silence," she said, her voice low. "Now we have to save them from the air they breathe." The math was brutally simple. They had a ship with failing systems, a population with no survival skills, and a clock ticking down to zero. Their only chance was a gamble. Liam pulled up a long-range scan, his fingers tracing a faint cluster of signals. The asteroid belt in the Theta sector. Early surveys indicated rich deposits of crystalline ice and raw minerals. "We could refine the ice for water and air, use the minerals for repairs, but the Peregrine cannot make that journey with its current damage, and it certainly cannot tow 1,000 people behind it." Anya joined them, her medic's mind already working on the logistics. "We would need to build temporary shelters, ration what little food we have. It is a massive risk." Eva's gaze remained fixed on the colonists. "Every option is a risk. Staying here is a death sentence. Taking them with us on a damaged ship is a slower one. But reaching those asteroids, that is a chance. It is the only chance they have to choose their own future." The plan was born from desperation, a fragile thread of logic stretched across an impossible distance. They would have to patch the Peregrine with scavenged parts, teach the basics of survival to people who had never felt hunger, and lead them into the unforgiving dark, not toward a rescue, but toward a new beginning they would have to build with their own hands. The Peregrine's main hangar bay echoed with the frantic sounds of preparation. A single colony shuttle, its hull still bearing the faded designation Elysian Transport 7, was being stripped of non-essential panels and loaded with every cutting laser and storage container they could scavenge. Liam oversaw the work, his face smudged with grime and etched with a focus that bordered on desperation. This shuttle was their only chance, a fragile key to unlocking the resources they needed to survive. He had chosen his crew carefully, two of the newly awakened colonists who had shown a flicker of their old technical skills, and Anya, whose medical knowledge might be the most valuable tool of all if things went wrong. "We are not just getting rocks," he told them, his voice cutting through the clamor. "We are getting time. Every gram of ice, every ounce of mineral is another hour of air, another day of hope." The shuttle's engines coughed to life, a ragged, unhealthy sound that did nothing to inspire confidence. With a final, grinding shudder, the craft lifted from the bay floor and shot out into the star-dusted black, leaving the fragile camp and its failing life support behind. The journey to the asteroid belt was a tense, silent vigil, every tremor of the old shuttle feeling like a prelude to collapse. Then the field appeared ahead, a chaotic sea of tumbling rock and ice stretching to the horizon. It was beautiful and deadly. Liam guided the shuttle into the maelstrom, his hands dancing across the controls as he navigated a slalom between mountain-sized spinning rocks. The smaller debris was the real threat, a constant hail of pebbles and ice shards that rattled the hull like gunfire. For hours they worked, the shuttle latching onto a promising, crystalline-rich asteroid. The cutting lasers flared, carving out chunks of frozen water and metallic ore. It was grueling, dangerous work, every maneuver requiring perfect precision to avoid being crushed by the asteroid's slow, relentless spin. But the storage bays slowly filled, the mass of the shuttle increasing with every precious load. The return trip began, the mood inside the cabin lighter, buoyed by the weight of their success. They had done it. They had bought their people a chance. It was then, as Liam ran a standard navigational sweep, that the sensor pinged. An alert flashed on his screen, identifying a vessel on a direct intercept course. It was not a colony ship. It was not one of theirs. Its design was sleek, predatory, and utterly corporate, a style of ship that had no business in this forgotten sector of space. A cold dread, entirely separate from the void outside, settled in the cabin. Their struggle for survival had just attracted attention, and the ship closing in on them looked less like a savior and more like a predator moving in for the kill. The hail was a chime of cold, corporate precision. A face materialized on their main screen, clean-shaven and smiling with the practiced ease of a man used to closing deals. "This is Captain Jax of the Inquisitor," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. "We detected your unique situation from our long-range scans. My employers are very interested in the technological marvel you have uncovered." His eyes scanned their battered shuttle, the ice crystals still frosting its hull, and his smile widened, revealing a row of perfectly aligned teeth. It was a predator's grin. "We can provide the order and resources you so clearly lack." He spoke of stability, of advanced fabrication, of saving lives, but the subtext was as clear as the void outside. This was not a rescue. It was an acquisition. They were not survivors to be saved, but an asset to be collected. Their hard-won freedom and the terrifying power of the architect's technology now a commodity on some distant corporate balance sheet. The choice they had fought so hard to give the colonists was being stolen before their eyes, replaced with the sterile promise of a new kind of cage, one built not of logic, but of debt and control. The corporate captain's smooth words hung in the air of the hangar bay, a promise of order that felt like a noose. The fragile unity of the newly awakened colonists shattered in an instant. A man with haunted eyes pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his hands trembling. "Please, Commander," he begged Eva, his voice cracking. "We cannot do this. We are not strong enough. The fear is too much. Take their offer. Give us the safety we had before." His plea was echoed by a chorus of others, their faces etched with the raw terror of a world without the harmony's numb embrace. They were drowning in a sea of their own feelings, and the corporate ship looked like a solid shore. But from the other side of the bay, a different voice cut through the fear, clear and sharp as broken glass. "That safety is a lie." A woman named Ilara stepped forward, her jaw set, her eyes blazing with a fire that had been rekindled from cold ash. She was the same woman who had wept at the sight of the sunset, and now that wonder had hardened into a fierce, protective resolve. "They will not save us. They will just put us in a different cage, one made of contracts and control. Do you want to trade one master for another? Have we not been puppets long enough?" The colony fractured before their eyes, a chasm of fear on one side and a desperate, burning need for self-determination on the other. Eva stood between them, the weight of their future pressing down. She was not facing a corporate predator alone, but a civil war brewing within the very people she had fought to set free. The choice was no longer about survival, but about the soul of the society they would build, and the two paths before them were tearing their new beginning apart at the seams. The shouting in the hangar bay fell away as a sleek, silver case descended on a delivery drone, landing softly at Captain Jack's feet via the viewscreen. A gesture of goodwill, he called it, his smile never faltering. Inside rested dozens of hyposprays filled with a shimmering silver liquid. "Advanced medical nanites," he explained smoothly. "They will stabilize your people's erratic biosigns, calm the neural chaos. It is the first step toward a new, sustainable order." Anya's healer instincts screamed in silence. While desperate colonists reached for the supposed cure, she snatched one of the hyposprays and plugged it into her portable med scanner. The results made her blood run cold. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking with Eva's across the bay. "They are not healers," she said, her voice cutting through the hopeful murmurs. "They are suppressors. The nanites are programmed to bind to the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. They will not cure the trauma. They will chemically inhibit any strong emotional response." The corporate plan snapped into a terrifying, brutal focus. They did not want to save a struggling colony. They wanted to manufacture one. They were not offering a lifeline, but a leash, creating a docile, manageable, and perfectly efficient workforce stripped of the very feelings that made their rebellion possible. The gift was not medicine. It was a new, more insidious form of the harmony, delivered in a pretty silver box. The fight for their future had just become a battle against the poison in their own veins. The silver case of hyposprays sat between them like a coiled serpent, its promise of calm a poison threatening to strangle their fragile new world. Captain Jack's patience, however, was a finite resource. On the main view screen, his polished smile vanished, replaced by a cold, corporate finality. "It is clear you are incapable of managing this transition," he stated, his voice losing all pretense of warmth. The Inquisitor will now provide the necessary oversight. Behind him, the sleek corporate vessel began to disgorge its shuttles, a swarm of angular, insect-like craft descending toward the colony with unnerving precision. This was not an offer anymore. It was an invasion. Eva's mind raced, scanning their pitiful defenses. They had no weapons, no shields, only a half-dead ship and a planet full of broken, terrified people. Then her eyes fell on Liam, who was frantically working at a secondary console, his face lit by a schematic of the colony's original, long-dormant orbital defense network. "It is mostly slag," he reported, his voice tight. "But the targeting system for the automated mining lasers, I think I can reroute power. It will not fire, but I can make it look like it is aiming." Eva's decision was instantaneous, born of pure, desperate defiance. "Do it. Target the debris field we just created. Make them think we can bring it down on their heads." With a surge of stolen power, the ancient defense grid hummed to life. Ghost targets painted the swarm of corporate shuttles, while the powerful mining lasers, now under Liam's frantic control, lanced out not at the ships, but at the precarious field of asteroids and wreckage orbiting the planet. They shattered a few key junctures, sending a cascade of tumbling rock and metal spinning into the shuttle's designated landing paths. It was a screen, a chaotic, unpredictable barrier that made any approach suicidal. Eva opened a channel, her voice echoing across the void, stripped of fear and filled with a raw, territorial authority she did not feel. "This is our home," she transmitted, her gaze locked on Jack's stunned face. "You are not welcome here." The bluff was a fragile one, a performance of strength where none existed. But for now, the swirling storm of orbital debris was a shield, and the descending shuttles veered away, their perfect formation broken. They had bought themselves time, but the clock was still ticking. And the corporate wolf at their door had only been momentarily surprised, not defeated. The orbital debris spun a fragile shield, but it was a defense built on a lie, and the corporate captain knew it. A military standoff was a game they could not win. Eva saw the truth in Jax's cold, calculating eyes on the view screen. He was simply waiting for their power to fail, for their bluff to collapse. So she changed the battlefield entirely. She opened a channel, bypassing the encrypted corporate command frequency and flooding the general bands with a raw, unedited data stream. She did not transmit schematics or technological readouts. She broadcast a story. It began with the final, desperate confession of Alistair Kane, his voice cracking with the grief of a man who had built a tomb for the human heart. Then she sent the archive logs, the video of the woman with the hydroponic roses, the audio of the man screaming his wife's name as she was taken for recalibration. She sent the sensor record of Kale, his body braced in the closing door, his last words a raw, human scream. "Do not let them forget." And then she sent something new. A live feed from the surface, focused on a small group of colonists huddled under the alien sky. A child who had never known anything but sterile silence pointed a trembling finger at a shooting star. A sound escaped her lips, a small, bewildered gasp that blossomed into a genuine, unfettered laugh. The sound was clumsy and real, a stark contrast to the dead air of the corporate channel. Eva spoke then, her voice quiet but carrying across the void. "You are not salvaging a machine, Captain. You are looking at people who have just learned how to breathe again. We are not an asset to be acquired. We are a warning and a second chance. Is there no one on your ship who remembers what a sunset is for?" On the bridge of the Inquisitor, the silence was different. The crew, a collection of efficient, corporate-trained specialists, did not look at their captain. They stared at their own secondary screens, at the face of a man sacrificing himself for a feeling, at the sound of a child's laugh echoing in the cold, sterile dark. One junior comms officer, her face pale, slowly reached up and wiped a single, unexpected tear from her cheek. The weapon was not a laser, but a memory. The target was not their ship, but their souls. The silence on the bridge of the Inquisitor was thick enough to taste. Captain Jax stared at the viewscreen, his face a rigid mask of impatience, waiting for the pathetic rebel bluff to crumble. On the main sensor display, the chaotic debris field still spun its protective web. That was enough. He turned to his tactical officer, his voice a low, cold command. "Clear a path. Fire a warning shot across their bow. Scatter that junk." The tactical officer's fingers danced across the console, initiating the firing sequence. A low hum should have built as the primary plasma cannons charged. Instead, a single, sharp alarm blared. A cascade of red icons flooded his screen. "Weapon systems offline," the officer reported, his voice tight with confusion. "Power conduits to the forward battery have been severed. Internal sabotage." Jack's head snapped around, his eyes scanning his crew. They avoided his gaze, their postures rigid. In the tense quiet, a young junior officer at the environmental station kept her head down, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in her lap. She was the one who had wiped away a tear moments before, and the ghost of that single, human gesture had been enough to make her risk everything. The perfect corporate machine had developed its first critical flaw, not from an external attack, but from a conscience reawakened deep within its own heart. Before Jax could roar his next order, a new alert chimed across every station. Long-range sensors painted 3 new signatures dropping out of warp. Their designs were blocky, practical, and unmistakably military. The lead vessel hailed every ship in the vicinity, its commander's voice a calm, authoritative baritone that brooked no argument. "This is Commander Vance of the Earth Federation, Deep Space Patrol Vessel Sol. We are responding to a general distress broadcast. Stand down all weapons and prepare for inspection." The corporate shuttles, caught between the debris and the new arrivals, froze in space. The balance of power had just irrevocably shifted, and the source of that shift was not a weapon, but a story that had finally found a listener. Commander Vance's gaze was as steady as his ship, sweeping across the desperate faces on the colony's surface and the predatory stillness of the corporate vessel. His judgment, when it came, was a careful, calibrated thing. "The actions of the Inquisitor are a violation of interstellar corporate law," he stated, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Their claim is void," but his attention then turned to the colonists, and his tone shifted from condemnation to a profound, official caution. "Your society has undergone a catastrophic psychological event. You have no functional government, no stable infrastructure, and a population suffering from collective trauma. You are, by any legal definition, an unstable entity." The safety he offered was not the freedom they had fought for. He proposed a Earth Federation protectorate. It meant security, resources, and guidance, a shield against the corporate wolves. But that shield came with a supervisor. It meant Federation advisors overseeing their every decision, regulations governing their rebuilding, and a long, bureaucratic road to any future independence. It was not a cage, But it was a leash, a gentle one perhaps, but a leash all the same. The colonists were no longer choosing between corporate enslavement and chaotic freedom. They were being offered a third path, one that promised survival at the cost of absolute sovereignty. Could they trust an outside power to guide them, or was any oversight, no matter how well-intentioned, just another form of the control they had just shattered? The weight of that choice settled over the entire colony. A new kind of silence filled not with fear, but with the sobering reality of a compromised future. The air in the main hangar was electric, charged with a sound the colony had not known for generations, the sound of hundreds of individual voices raised in passionate, unscripted debate. Under the watchful eyes of Commander Vance and his officers, the colonists gathered, not in geometric rows, but in a messy, shifting crowd. An older man, his hands still trembling, pleaded for the safety of the Protectorate. "We are like children who have just learned to walk," he argued, his voice cracking. "To run now is to fall and break everything." A young woman, her face alight with a fierce new fire, shot back immediately. "Were we children when we chose to feel again? When Kale chose to die for us? We have earned the right to fall, if that is what it takes." This was not the cold logic of the harmony or the smooth coercion of the corporation. This was the beautiful, terrifying noise of a people rediscovering their own will. They were not just debating a political future. They were wrestling with the very meaning of the freedom they had paid for in tears and blood. The choice was a mirror held up to their newfound souls. Did they trust themselves enough to be truly free, with all its inherent risks and potential for failure? Or did the ghost of their perfect, silent past still hold enough power to make them choose a new, gentler cage? The vote was not about policy. It was a referendum on their own courage. Each colonist stepped forward to cast their ballot, a simple token, and in that small act was the weight of a universe. They were not just choosing a path. They were defining the very essence of the people they would become. The final tally was agonizingly close, a handful of votes tipping the scales toward the Federation Protectorate. But this was not a surrender. It was a negotiation forged in the fires of their recent history. The agreement they drafted was unlike any the Federation had ever seen, layered with conditions and safeguards. Its core principle was non-negotiable. The Federation would provide security and material aid, but it would have no say in the colony's cultural or psychological development. Their right to feel, to remember their past in all its pain and beauty, and to make their own choices, good or bad, was declared inviolable. From the ashes of the harmony, they began to build a new foundation, not of perfect logic, but of hard-won wisdom. They gathered, not in silent rows, but in passionate, messy circles, to draft their own charter. It was a document written in the language of scars. It guaranteed the freedom of artistic expression, not as a luxury, but as a necessity for a healthy mind. It protected the right to grieve openly, to argue passionately, and to love without seeking permission from any system. And above the door of their new, makeshift council chamber, carved into a salvaged beam of ship-grade alloy, they etched the 4 words that would guide every law, every decision, every waking moment of their new society. Never again shall we forget. This was their vow, not to a government, but to their own fragile human souls. The phrase was a shield against the seductive whisper of easy answers, a permanent reminder that the price of a perfect peace was a soul they were no longer willing to pay. The plaza was once the heart of the harmony's geometric perfection, a vast expanse of seamless, gray paving where colonists once stood in silent, synchronized rows. Now, the sound of cracking stone filled the air as they took pickaxes to the sterile surface, their muscles straining not for efficiency, but for meaning. They chiseled out geometric slabs and broke the unyielding ground beneath, their hands becoming caked with real soil for the first time in their remembered lives. Into the freshly turned earth they placed 2 kinds of hope. The first were seeds from earth, carefully preserved in the Peregrine's archives: tomatoes, lavender, ancient grains. The second were tiny, hardy spores native to Elysian, discovered clinging to life in the planet's deep, shadowed canyons. This garden would not be a replica of a lost world or a submission to a new one. It would be a fusion, a testament to the idea that life could be nurtured, not controlled. In the garden's center, where the main convergence point of the old harmony used to be, they built their monument. It was not grand or imposing. It was a simple, rough-hewn obelisk made from the very paving stones they had torn up. Using laser cutters and their own unskilled, determined hands, they etched names into the stone's cool, gray surface. Every mark was a promise. Cale's name was there, a permanent tribute to the man who had held the door. The names of those lost to the recalibration chambers were there, too, remembered not as errors corrected, but as souls extinguished. This was not a memorial to a perfect peace. It was a grave marker for the silence they had chosen to shatter. A young girl, one of the first children to be born into this new world of feeling, carefully pressed a seed into the soil near the monument's base. Her mother, a woman who had once monitored power grids with empty eyes, knelt beside her, guiding her small hands. They watered the spot together. The water, a precious resource they had chosen to spend on something that offered no logical return, only the fragile chance of beauty. This garden was their new covenant. It was a physical, growing testament to their charter's core principle. They would nurture life in all its unpredictable, emotional, and gloriously messy forms, understanding now that the true strength of a society is not measured by its flawless order, but by its courage to care for a single, vulnerable sprout pushing its way toward the sun. The vote had chosen a protectorate, but the spirit of the rebellion sailed with Ilara. Her name was spoken not just as a title, but as a promise. This woman, who had once wept at a sunset and later defied a corporate fleet with raw conviction, was now their first ambassador. There was no grand ceremony for her departure, only a quiet moment at the Peregrine's airlock. She carried no gifts of technology or resources, only a data chip containing their charter and the unedited archives of their suffering and rebirth. "I will make sure they understand," she told Commander Eva, her grip firm and her eyes clear. "We are not a problem to be solved. We are a people to be understood." Her mission was a delicate and perilous one. She would walk into the gleaming, bureaucratic heart of the Federation, a system built on precedent and procedure, and speak a language it had largely forgotten: the language of the heart. She had to translate their painful, beautiful chaos into a case for sovereignty, to convince a vast, orderly government that the right to feel messy emotions was as vital as the right to breathe clean air. She would have to explain why a society would choose the painful uncertainty of self-determination over the safe, managed comfort of external control. As her shuttle detached and angled toward the waiting Federation vessel, it carried more than a diplomat. It carried the memory of a single tear on a young man's cheek during recalibration, the echo of a child's first laugh under a foreign sky, and the ghost of a man who held a door so others could remember how to feel. Ilara's mission was to make the galaxy hear that story, and in hearing it, to recognize that humanity's greatest strength was never its efficiency, but its relentless, imperfect, and glorious capacity to feel. The work of rebuilding was measured in more than new structures. It was counted in recovered heartbeats, in the ghostly frequencies of songs thought lost forever. Deep within the restored archives, a new kind of labor began, one of quiet reverence. Scientists and historians, their own memories still fresh with the scars of awakening, began the painstaking task of digital archaeology. They were not just retrieving data, they were performing a rescue mission on the soul of their own people. The Harmony had not simply stored their past, it had systematically purged it, corrupting files and scattering fragments across dead servers. To recover a single poem required rebuilding it from 1,000 corrupted pieces, like reassembling a shattered vase from dust. Each successful recovery was met not with a quiet memo, but with a communal celebration. The day they restored the first full symphony, its soaring crescendos echoing through the main plaza, people stopped what they were doing and wept. They were not tears of sadness, but of profound recognition, as if a part of their own body, long numb, had suddenly flooded back with feeling. A recovered folktale about a trickster starlight sprite became a nightly ritual for the children. A collection of protest poetry, written in the early, desperate days of the resistance, was read aloud at council meetings, its fiery words a vaccine against complacency. This monumental effort needed a name, a purpose that would outlive the initial fervor. They called it the Remembering. It was formally established not as a museum, but as a permanent institution, the bedrock of their new society. Its mandate was simple and profound: to never let the silence return. The scholars of the Remembering became the guardians of their collective heartbeat, their work a daily reaffirmation of the vow etched above their council door. They understood that a society that forgets its pain is doomed to repeat it, but a society that forgets its joy has nothing left to fight for. In every melody restored, every brushstroke of a forgotten painting brought back to light, they were not just uncovering history. They were rebuilding their humanity, piece by beautiful, imperfect piece. The sound of laughter became the new curriculum. In a chamber once used for silent, communal meals, the colony established its first school. The walls, once a uniform gray, were now a riot of color, plastered with finger paintings of imagined starships and crayon sketches of the two suns that sometimes graced their sky. The children in this room had never known the harmony, its sterile silence as foreign to them as the concept of a forgotten sunset. They were the first true citizens of this new world, and their education reflected a delicate, deliberate balance. In the morning, they learned the practical necessities of survival, the mathematics of oxygen recycling, and the biology of the hydroponic gardens that now fed them. But in the afternoon, the lessons shifted. They were given tablets filled with the recovered archives of Earth, not as historical documents, but as living texts. They read poetry aloud, stumbling over the rhythms of ancient verses about love and loss, their young voices giving new life to old words. They were taught to play simple melodies on reclaimed instruments, the hesitant notes of a flute or the soft strum of a stringed instrument weaving a new soundtrack for the colony. Their teachers were the survivors, men and women who still carried the ghost of silence within them. To see a child weep without shame over a character's fate in a story, or to watch two friends resolve a quarrel over a toy with a clumsy, heartfelt apology, was a form of healing for the entire community. The children's unselfconscious play, their arguments and their swift reconciliations, were not seen as disruptions to be managed. They were celebrated as the highest form of learning, the practice of being human. The echo of their laughter in the corridors was more than just noise. It was a constant, living rebuttal to the architect's cold logic, the ultimate symbol of a society that had chosen a messy, vibrant, and feeling life over a perfect and silent death. The Peregrine's scarred hull gleamed under the harsh light of the repair bay, a testament to the brutal physics of survival. Its battered frame, once a symbol of desperate exploration, now stood as a beacon of a different purpose entirely. The ship was being refitted not for combat or for rescue, but for a journey carrying the most fragile and powerful cargo imaginable: a story. Its mission had transformed from one of investigation to one of communication, a vital artery reconnecting a lost limb to the body of humanity. The severed link, once cut by the architect's fear of feeling, was being reforged not with cables of data, but with threads of hard-won hope. Within its reinforced data vaults, the ship carried the complete, unvarnished truth of Elysian. It held the chilling final confession of Alistair Kane, the heartbreaking personal logs from the hidden archives, and the raw censor footage of their rebellion. But it also carried their charter, the document etched with the promise of never again shall we forget. and recordings of the children's laughter echoing in the new school. This was not a report to be filed away by some distant Earth bureaucrat. It was a living heart, transplanted from one world to another, meant to beat in time with the conscience of their species. The hope was that this story would not just inform, but inoculate. It would serve as a warning against the seductive lure of easy answers and perfect silence. A reminder to every corner of human space that the messy, painful, and beautiful struggle to feel is not a problem to be solved, but the very essence of what they are. As the final systems check hummed through the ship, the colonists gathered not in sorrow, but in solidarity. They were not sending their saviors away. They were sending their voice out into the great, listening dark, trusting that their message would find its way home and remind everyone who heard it what it truly means to be alive. The first festival began not with a schedule, but with a single, hesitant note from a flute. It was the melody Liam had decoded from the city's hum, the old lullaby, and as its tune drifted across the central plaza, something in the air shifted. One by one, others joined in. Someone produced a drum, its rhythm clumsy and unpracticed. A woman began to sing, her voice cracking at first, then gaining strength as others harmonized. There was no designated performer or audience. The music simply swelled from the crowd itself, a spontaneous, breathing thing. Long tables, once used for silent, functional meals, now groaned under the weight of a chaotic feast. There were misshapen loaves of bread from the first successful grain harvest, bowls of steamed native fungi, and platters of hydroponic vegetables arranged in vibrant, illogical patterns. People served each other with their hands, laughing when a juicy fruit dribbled down a chin, their fingers stained with colors that had no purpose but pleasure. No one monitored nutritional intake or caloric efficiency. The only measure was the shared joy of a full belly and the sound of conversation buzzing through the warm air. A man who had spent decades as a power flow regulator found himself dancing, his movements stiff and uncoordinated, his face split by a grin so wide it looked like it might hurt. He stumbled and a woman caught him, her own laughter mingling with his. They were not graceful, they were alive. In a quiet corner, two colonists held each other, their shoulders shaking with sobs as they finally mourned a mutual friend lost to the Recalibration Chambers years ago. No one shushed them or looked away. Their grief was given space, a sacred and necessary part of the celebration. This was the beautiful, inefficient chaos of human connection. This was the sound of a community forging itself not from identical parts, but from 1,000 broken pieces, each jagged edge finding its place in a tapestry more resilient and more vibrant than any perfect, silent machine could ever comprehend. The festival had no official end. It simply softened, the music fading into the gentle murmur of a people finally, fully at home with themselves. Eva Rostova stood at the viewport, her reflection a ghost against the vibrant tapestry of light below. The city was no longer a silent, metallic scar upon the planet's surface, but a living constellation. Pinpricks of warm yellow and soft blue traced the paths of streets where people still walked and talked long after their official work shifts had ended. The central plaza, once a place of terrifying geometric perfection, now pulsed with the gentle glow of communal fires and strung-up lanterns. This was not the cold, efficient luminescence of the harmony. This was the light of 1,000 individual lives, each burning with its own unique and unregulated flame. The Odyssey's mission, launched with such lofty ideals so many centuries ago, had ended in the most profound failure imaginable, a descent into a silent hell of their own making. Yet here, rising from those very ashes, was its redemption. The colony had not been rescued from the outside, it had rescued itself from within, clawing its way back from the brink of a perfect, feelingless extinction. It stood as a permanent, glowing testament to a single, fragile truth: that humanity, with all its glorious flaws, its capacity for grief, its messy arguments, and its unpredictable laughter, was a force worth remembering, worth fighting for, and absolutely worth feeling. Their first call for help came not from Earth, but from the dark. It was a faint, automated distress ping from a small mining outpost on a desolate moon in a neighboring system. Their primary life support reactor was failing, and their backup systems were not designed for a long-term crisis. On the Colony Council, the debate was brief. Some argued for caution, citing their own fragile resources and the immense risk of sending their best engineers and medics on a deep space journey. But the memory of their own silent plea, the ghost of the Odyssey's looping cry for help, hung heavy in the air. "We know the sound of that silence," one council member said, her voice soft but firm. "We cannot let it echo for someone else." The decision was unanimous. A team was assembled, not by a central AI assigning roles based on efficiency metrics, but by volunteers who stepped forward because their skills matched the need. They loaded a shuttle with spare parts from their own meager stocks, with medical supplies they could scarcely afford to give, and with something far more valuable than any technology: a deep, hard-won understanding of what it means to be truly alone in the void. As the shuttle lifted off, its trajectory was not plotted for strategic advantage or resource acquisition. Its course was set by a simple human impulse, the very same impulse the architect had tried to engineer out of existence. They were going because someone was in trouble, and they had the capacity to help. The mission was a declaration that their society, forged in the fires of reclaimed feeling, would now be defined not by what it built for itself, but by what it was willing to give away. They were transforming from a people who had been saved into a people who saved others, and in that transformation, they found a purpose more profound than any perfect, silent harmony could ever provide. The system upgrades hummed with a familiar, almost soothing rhythm, a process of continuous improvement that had become the colony's new heartbeat. Liam monitored the data streams, his focus absolute, until a single, anomalous signature caught his eye. It was a ghost, a sliver of code so elegantly hidden within the foundational architecture that it had survived the Great Purge. Isolating it was like performing surgery on a sleeping giant, but he managed to extract the self-contained subroutine without triggering a single alarm. It contained no grand design, no complex schematics. It held only a simple audio file, and the voice that emerged from the speakers was hauntingly familiar, yet stripped of all its former authority. It was Alistair Kane, but this was not the serene founder or the broken man from his final confession. This voice was quiet, raw, and filled with a weary, paternal warmth. "If you are hearing this, you have chosen to feel," the recording began, the words simple and direct. "I am sorry, and I am proud." The message ended there, leaving a silence in the control hub that was deeper than any void. He was not apologizing for the technology or for his initial dream. He was apologizing for the pain his perfect world had caused. And he was proud, not of the flawless society he had built, but of the messy, feeling, beautifully human one that had risen from its ashes to prove him wrong. This was not a command from an architect. It was a blessing from a father to his wayward children, an absolution delivered from beyond the grave. The message spread through the colony not as a formal announcement, but as a shared whisper, passed from person to person. There were no cheers, no grand celebrations. The reaction was a collective, quiet exhalation of a breath they did not know they had been holding. The man they had fought against, the ghost who had haunted their rebirth, had finally given them the one thing they never knew they needed: his forgiveness. And in receiving it, they found they could finally, fully forgive him in return. The long, painful journey from silence to song had found its final, peaceful chord, not in triumph, but in a shared understanding that even the most terrible mistakes could be redeemed by a single, heartfelt wish for another's happiness. The story of Elysian did not fade into the quiet archives of history. It became a living legend, whispered on the solar winds and taught to children on distant worlds not as a simple fable, but as a stark and vital warning. It is a story that asks its listeners the most profound of questions. Is a world without pain truly a world worth living in? The colony's journey from silent perfection to vibrant, messy life stands as a permanent rebuttal to the idea that humanity is a problem to be solved. Its true strength was never found in its flawless order, but in its courageous, collective decision to embrace the beautiful risk of feeling. The light from that world, once a cold, blue beacon of control, now shines as a warm and steady guide in the cosmic dark. A reminder that our greatest treasures are not our technologies, but our tears, our laughter, and our fierce, unbreakable will to choose our own destiny, no matter how imperfect it may be.